When my grandmother died, she left me enough money to change the course of my life. Not enough to make me rich. Not enough to stop working. But enough to give me something I had never really had in my parents' house. A head start. A cushion. A chance to build a life that belonged to me before someone else decided what I was allowed to want. I did not know. Standing in that funeral home in a black dress that still smelled faintly of dry cleaner starch, that the money she intended for me would become the final proof of what I had spent my entire life trying not to admit. In my family, love was never evenly distributed. It was invested. And my sister, Vanessa, was always the market favorite. Even at 32. I can still remember what my grandmother's hand felt like when she used to hold mine. Cool skin, thin fingers, a gold ring she never took off. She was the only person in our family who looked at me as if I were not a disappointment. She was trying to edit into something more presentable. She never spoke in grand speeches. She just noticed things. She noticed when my father mocked the way I saved birthday money in envelopes instead of spending it. She noticed when my mother praised Vanessa for buying designer boots on a credit card, then rolled her eyes when I said I was taking extra shifts at the bookstore during college. She noticed that every family dinner somehow became a celebration of Vanessa's latest plan and a quiet audit of my choices. Grandma would squeeze my hand under the table and say, "Some people build noise, some people build lives." At the time, I did not fully understand what she meant. Later, I built my entire future on that sentence. Vanessa was 2 years older than me. Prettier in the way that people reward immediately. Louder in the way that takes up oxygen. And gifted with that particular family talent of turning irresponsibility into charm. She could miss rent. Forget appointments. Start fights in restaurants. And somehow leave the situation with sympathy. If I made one small mistake, it became a character flaw. Vanessa wasn't just the favorite child. She was the family's chosen narrative. Everything good about her was proof of her potential. Everything bad about her was someone else's fault. When she failed, my parents called it stress. When I succeeded, they called it luck. That was our household economy. By the time I was in high school, I had stopped competing. There was no point. Vanessa got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for her creativity. Vanessa got a used car at 17 because she had a social life to maintain. I got a bus pass and a lecture about independence building character. I worked after school. I paid for my own textbooks in college. I learned how to compare prices. How to stretch soup for 3 days. How to smile when people said, "You're so mature," when what they really meant was, "No one is coming to help you. And you've gotten very good at pretending that doesn't hurt." Vanessa, meanwhile, changed majors twice. Dropped out once, moved back home twice, and somehow still remained the family's great investment. Every setback became more justification to pour resources into her. She was always on the edge of becoming something extraordinary. According to my mother, my father said she just needed the right support. No one ever said that about me. I was not the child they dreamed over. I was the child they measured. When Grandma got sick, I was the one who drove her to appointments. I was the one who sat with her during chemotherapy. The one who learned which crackers she could stomach and which blankets made the hospital room feel less cold. Vanessa came when it was convenient, usually in dramatic bursts, carrying flowers that looked expensive and conversations that somehow circled back to her own life. My mother called Vanessa emotionally generous. I called her absent with good timing. Grandma never said much about it. But once, late one November afternoon, while rain tapped at the windows of her condo and the kettle hissed in the kitchen, she asked me to reach into the second drawer of her desk. There were papers inside, neatly clipped, labels in her small, slanted handwriting. "People show you who they are around money," she said. I laughed softly and told her that was a depressing thing to say over tea. "It's a useful thing to say over tea," she replied. "Sugar helps hard truths go down." She didn't tell me details. She didn't need to. There was something in the way she looked at me that day, calm and direct, that settled into my chest like a stone. She knew, not in some vague emotional way. She knew exactly what kind of family she had. And she knew exactly what they would do if there were ever anything left behind worth wanting. After she died, the reading of the will happened in a small law office that smelled like leather chairs and old paper. The kind of place where every cough sounds too loud. My parents sat on one side. Vanessa sat in cream trousers and a blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I sat at the end of the table and folded my hands in my lap to keep from picking at the edge of my thumbnail. The attorney was kind, formal, and careful with his voice. Grandma left specific pieces of jewelry, some donations, and then the bulk of what mattered. The condo would be sold, certain accounts would be distributed, and then he looked at me. My grandmother had left me a separate inheritance. Not huge, but substantial. $180,000. My stomach dropped. I did not breathe. It felt impossible, almost embarrassing, to hear a number like that attached to my name. I had spent so much of my life living as if I should apologize for needing anything at all. Hearing that someone had planned something that large for me felt like standing in a room and realizing a door had been open the whole time. The attorney explained that Grandma had written a short letter to go with it. I still know the exact words because I read that letter so many times the folds started tearing. "Eleanor has always understood the value of stability. This money is to be used for her future, at her discretion, and not for the rescue of others. She will be pressured. I know that. My hope is that, for once, she will choose herself." No one spoke for a second after he read it. Then Vanessa laughed. Not a happy laugh, a thin one, sharp around the edges. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I guess Grandma had favorites too." My mother gave a little smile like she wanted to turn it into a joke. My father cleared his throat. The attorney continued speaking. But the air in the room had changed. What should have been a solemn transfer of a final gift turned instantly into something my family recognized better. Competition, resentment, repositioning. By the time we walked to the parking lot, my mother was already doing what she always did, when reality inconvenienced the story she preferred. She was reframing. "Your grandmother just worried about you," she said, as if that explained everything. "Vanessa has always been more naturally confident. You were the one who needed security." I remember turning to look at her under that pale gray sky and thinking, for the first time, with real clarity, that some insults arrive wearing the clothes of concern. I should have gone home after that. I should have called my bank and found a financial advisor and protected the money exactly the way Grandma intended. Instead, I made the mistake that children like me are trained to make. I stayed available. The calls started within a week. First, my mother said we should all be open and transparent, as a family, about future plans. Then my father suggested it would be wise to combine everyone's thinking before I made any major decisions. Vanessa did not ask directly at first. She just started talking more often about housing, about how rent was wasting money, about how mortgage rates might not stay favorable, about how real estate was the only smart path in uncertain times. She spoke as if she had discovered personal finance while scrolling social media between brunches. At Sunday dinner 2 weeks later, my parents revealed the real conversation they had been building toward. Vanessa had found a house. Not a mansion, not a luxury property, but a beautiful 3-bedroom craftsman in a rapidly growing suburb with good schools, charming porches, and all the coded language people use when they are trying to make a purchase sound morally superior. It's an investment, my father said. It's a chance for Vanessa to finally get settled, my mother added. Vanessa took a slow sip of wine and said, "I'm just trying to build something." I stared at them. Then I asked the obvious question. What does this have to do with me? There was a pause, so small, someone less experienced might have missed it. My mother went first. Well, sweetheart, the down payment gap is about $120,000. She said it gently, carefully, the way people speak when they already believe your refusal will be unreasonable. I laughed because it was so absurd, I thought, for one stupid second, that this had to be some elaborate misunderstanding. You want me to give Vanessa most of my inheritance? My father leaned forward. Not give. Help? This would still stay in the family. That phrase, stay in the family, as if I had somehow drifted outside its walls. I told them no. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just no. I said Grandma left that money to me. I said I needed to think about my own future. I said I wanted to use part of it for graduate school and part as savings, and maybe, someday, as my own down payment. Vanessa rolled her eyes so hard, it looked painful. You are so obsessed with being the victim, she said. This is why people think you're cold. I can still feel the heat that rose up my neck, that old mix of humiliation and disbelief, the particular anger that comes from being accused of selfishness by people standing in the middle of your boundaries with their hands out. My mother reached for my wrist across the table. Sweetheart, listen, Vanessa is at a stage in life where this really matters. And I'm not? I asked. My father gave me that weary look he always used when he wanted to cast himself as the patient adult in a conversation he was actively causing. You've always been capable. You'll land on your feet. Vanessa needs a little more support. There it was, the full creed of my family, spoken plainly. I was punishable for competence, because I had survived neglect with some grace. They had decided I could survive anything, including theft. I left dinner early that night and cried in my car in the grocery store parking lot 2 blocks away. Not because I was confused. By then I understood exactly what they wanted. I cried because a tiny part of me had still hoped that Grandma's letter would matter, that her words would stand between me and them like a locked gate. But people who believe they are entitled to you always find ways to step over the fence. For the next month, the pressure intensified. Texts from my mother about family legacy. Calls from my father about smart asset allocation. Voice notes from Vanessa about how embarrassed she was even having to ask, which somehow always included a detailed explanation of what I owed her emotionally for being the easier child. At one point, my mother sent me photos of the house. Sunlit kitchen. Window seat. Small backyard. Can't you just picture holidays here? She wrote. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. I can picture my inheritance in every room. That started a 3-day silence. Then came the guilt campaign. My aunt called to say she heard Vanessa was trying to finally put down roots, and how wonderful that would be after all she's been through. My cousin asked whether I was really going to let family tensions grow over money. My mother started mentioning Grandma in ways that made my skin crawl. She would have wanted us all to stay close. No, she would have wanted you to keep your hands off what she left me. But in my family, even the dead were not allowed to speak for themselves if their words contradicted the living. I tried to do everything right. I met with a financial planner. I opened separate accounts. I learned about conservative investments and emergency funds and tax consequences. I thought if I became informed enough, structured enough, adult enough, I could hold the line without the entire family turning me into a villain. That was another mistake. Information does not soften entitlement. It threatens it. One Friday evening, my father asked me to stop by the house because he wanted to talk face to face. Like family should, I knew better. I still went. My mother had made roast chicken. Vanessa was there too. Though no one had mentioned that, the whole thing was staged. Even the candles on the table felt manipulative. Halfway through dinner, my father set down his fork and said, "We've been thinking about a fair solution." Fair. That word should have made me get up immediately. Instead, I listened. They proposed that I contribute $100,000 toward Vanessa's down payment. And in return, the house would essentially represent shared family equity. My mother said that later. When things were more settled, they would make sure it all balanced out. Vanessa said she would always remember who helped her. I asked for specifics. My father frowned. What specifics? In writing, I said, ownership, repayment, legal structure. What exactly would I receive in exchange? The silence that followed was almost beautiful. Not because it was peaceful, because it stripped the mask off. My mother blinked first. "Why are you making this so ugly?" Vanessa snorted. "Because she wants to act like she's in some corporate negotiation instead of helping her sister." My father's jaw tightened. "No one is taking advantage of you." I looked at him and thought, "You don't even hear yourself." Then I did something small that changed the rest of my life. I said, "If no one is taking advantage of me, you won't mind putting every part of this proposal into a contract reviewed by my attorney." There was no attorney. Not yet. But it was the first time I learned the power of sounding like someone who belonged to herself. Vanessa pushed back her chair. "This is unbelievable. Grandma leaves you money because she thinks you're fragile. And suddenly you think you're Warren Buffett." I stood up. "I think," I said, "that the money left to me is mine." My mother started crying immediately. She had that talent too. Tears on command. Especially when an audience was present. "After everything we've done for you," she said. I laughed once, quietly. That made my father angrier than if I had screamed. "What is wrong with you lately?" he snapped. "Why are you so determined to divide this family?" That question sat between us like something rotten. Because that was always their final move. Take the wound they created and accuse me of causing the bleeding. I left before dessert. In the driveway, I could hear Vanessa's voice through the open front window saying, "She's doing this because she likes watching people beg." But the truth was almost the opposite. I had spent my whole life trying to avoid making anyone beg. I had over-accommodated, over-explained, over-forgiven. and now they were furious because I had finally discovered a word they could hear. No. A week later, my mother invited me to coffee and pretended the last dinner had been unfortunate but fixable. She wore soft colors, spoke softly, ordered chamomile tea she barely touched. Then she said something I never forgot. "You have to understand," she told me. "Money should go where it creates the most impact." I stared at her. She continued as if she were saying something wise. "Vanessa is meant for a bigger life. She always has been. You're simpler. You don't need as much to be content." There it was, again. That old family theology. Vanessa deserved investment because she performed importance. I deserved less because I endured disappointment quietly. My mother reached across the cafe table and covered my hand with hers. "This isn't about loving you less." I pulled my hand away. "Yes," I said. "It is." Her face changed. Not hurt. Annoyance. Because I had named the thing she preferred to dress up in softer language. I left money for my coffee on the table and walked out. After that, the punishment began. Family group chats went silent when I answered. Plans happened without me. Photos appeared online from dinners I was not invited to. My aunt posted one, captioned, "Nothing like family sticking together through hard choices." That one almost made me laugh. Hard choices. As if stealing from me required bravery. 3 months later, I learned the house had closed. Not from my parents. From social media. Vanessa posted a photo standing on the front porch with a giant key-shaped sign, and my parents flanking her like proud campaign donors. My mother had her arm around Vanessa's waist. My father looked 10 years younger. The caption read, "So proud of our girl for becoming a homeowner." Our girl. I stared at the image until the edges of it blurred. Then I called my mother. She answered on the third ring with the bright voice people use when they know they are guilty and hope performance will outrun evidence. "You bought the house?" I said. A beat. Then, "We were going to tell you." "With what money?" Another pause. Then came the lie shaped like partial truth. "We had to make some decisions." I sat down on the edge of my bed because my legs suddenly felt strange and far away from me. "What decisions?" My father got on the line. "We borrowed against future distributions and used some family assets." "Whose assets?" Silence. Then he exhaled. "Impatient. Eleanor, don't do this." That was my answer. Later. After 2 calls and 1 message to the attorney's office, I learned exactly what had happened. My inheritance had been placed in a temporary family-managed holding arrangement during probate finalization. My parents had persuaded the executor to authorize an early movement of funds tied to interfamily allocation, presenting it as a consensual support structure pending final account settlement. There were signatures, forms, language designed to sound administrative rather than predatory. My name was not forged. That would have been cleaner. Instead, they had used every vague assumption ever attached to me, every family expectation, every soft pressure campaign, every implied future balancing promise, enough gray space to move quickly before I understood the machinery. By the time the final numbers were fully settled, over $130,000 connected to what Grandma intended for me had been directed into the house purchase. I was left with a fraction. I remember sitting at my tiny kitchen table with the paperwork spread around me, the refrigerator humming behind me, Afternoon light falling in a sharp rectangle across the floor, and feeling something inside me become very still. Not healed. Not calm. Cold. I was past tears. Past outrage. Even. It was the stillness of finally seeing a building for what it is after years of being told it is a home. I called my father once more. "You took my inheritance?" He did not deny it. He just said, "We made a family decision." That sentence changed everything. Because once someone says that to your face, the illusion is over. I asked whether they planned to repay it. He said, "The house is appreciating. You'll thank us later." And then I heard Vanessa laughing in the background. I hung up. That night, I took Grandma's letter out again. I read the line about pressure. I read the line about choosing myself. And for the first time, I understood that she had not written those words because she thought I was weak. She wrote them because she knew exactly how ruthless love becomes when it is mixed with entitlement. The next morning, I opened a new account at a different bank. I moved what remained of the inheritance. I cut every shared financial thread I could find. I changed passwords. I froze my credit. I scheduled consultations with 2 attorneys and 1 therapist. Because I had finally learned something humiliating and useful at the same time. When people steal from you emotionally for long enough, you start needing professional help to hear your own instincts again. The first attorney told me that what happened lived in the ugly territory between unethical and challengeable. There might be claims. There might be leverage. There would certainly be cost. He asked me what outcome I wanted. Repayment? Exposure? Distance? I did not know. At least not yet. All I knew was that I could not stay inside the version of myself they had designed. So I made a plan. Not a dramatic one. Not cinematic. The kind of plan my family never respected because it looked too boring to be powerful. I downsized apartments. I took on freelance bookkeeping at night, in addition to my full-time administrative job at a medical office. I stopped explaining my life to anyone who had not earned access to it. I learned everything I could about budgeting. Index funds. High-yield savings. And how to live below the standard people assume they need to perform adulthood. Vanessa had the house. Fine. I would build liquidity. She had visible status. I would build quiet safety. She had a porch for photographs. I would build a future no one could confiscate. Months passed. Then a year. I saw my family less and less. Partly because they stopped inviting me when it became clear I was not going to play grateful extra in the Vanessa Homeowner Triumph Tour. And partly because I stopped going anywhere my dignity would be used as decoration. Still, news leaked through. The house needed repairs. The roof estimate came in higher than expected. Property taxes rose. Vanessa was sure she would refinance soon. Then she was sure the area's values would keep climbing. Then she was sure some boyfriend with a startup idea was going to move in and help. My parents kept helping. Small amounts at first. Then bigger ones. Furniture. Appliances. Emergency plumbing. A landscaping bill my mother referred to as an investment in curb appeal. I said nothing. I worked. I saved. I watched. I began to understand something that changed how I saw my entire childhood. Favoritism is not just unfairness. It is a financial model. Some families treat one child like a savings account and another like a slot machine. Guess which one they expect to cash out? Eventually, by the second year, I had enough money set aside to breathe differently. Not extravagantly, just differently. My emergency fund was real. My retirement account had momentum. I had started a small side business helping women organize personal budgets after divorce or family upheaval. It began with one client from work, then her cousin, then a friend from church. And suddenly I had Saturday mornings full of spreadsheets, coffee, and women telling me stories they had never said out loud before. Stories about husbands who hid debt, brothers who manipulated estates, parents who called control concern. I was good at helping them because numbers had finally become my native language for self-protection. When I looked at bank statements, I did not just see transactions. I saw power, pattern, truth. My family, meanwhile, kept performing prosperity. At Thanksgiving, Vanessa arrived in a wool coat too expensive for someone always talking about cash flow. My mother complimented her dining room chairs for 10 full minutes. My father made pointed remarks about people who hoard money out of fear instead of putting it to work. I almost smiled at that, because by then, my so-called fear was earning interest. During dessert, Vanessa turned to me and asked in that bright, poisonous voice of hers, "So are you still renting?" The whole table went quiet. I set down my fork. "Yes." I said, "I prefer living somewhere I can afford." My aunt coughed into her napkin to hide a laugh. Vanessa's mouth tightened. My mother jumped in immediately. "There's nothing wrong with taking a leap when you're building equity." "No." I said, "There's nothing wrong with that. Assuming it's your equity." That was the first time I let myself push back in public. Small. Precise. Enough to let them know I was no longer interested in swallowing every insult whole. My father changed the subject, but I saw the look on my mother's face. Not remorse. Recognition. She was beginning to understand that I no longer needed them to tell me what was reasonable. And that made me dangerous. Around that same time, the market started shifting. At first, it was just headlines. Interest rates climbing. Inventory tightening in strange ways. Price corrections in overheated suburbs. Then it became phone calls I was not supposed to hear, but did. Because families like mine are terrible at secrecy when they need sympathy. Vanessa's adjustable rate mortgage reset. One of the repairs had been financed badly. Her boyfriend had left. The house was worth less than what she owed after all the upgrades and refinancing games. My mother said the market was irrational. My father said it would rebound. Vanessa said everyone was overreacting. I listened. I updated my spreadsheets. I made another transfer into savings. And I waited. Because some storms announce themselves long before the roof gives way. The first real crack came on a Tuesday in March. I know that because I was in the middle of reconciling payroll reports when my phone buzzed 3 times in a row. My mother, then my father, then Vanessa. No one in my family ever called in sequence unless there was either a medical emergency or a financial one. And since no one had died, I assumed someone needed money. I let the first round go to voicemail. Then the second. Then my father sent a text. "Call us. It's urgent." There was no greeting. No pretense. No softening language. Just urgency. As if urgency itself were a claim on me. I finished the report I was working on before I called back. That was new. The old me would have answered in the first ring. Pulse high. Already halfway inside their panic. But by then I had learned that other people's emergencies feel less holy when you stop abandoning yourself to kneel at them. My mother picked up. Her voice was thin, shocky, deliberately composed in that way that signals performance, but also real distress. "Eleanor," she said. "Thank God." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the pale gray wall of my office. "What happened?" "It's the house." Of course it was. I closed my eyes for half a second and said nothing. She rushed to fill the silence. "There have been some setbacks. Temporary ones. Vanessa had some rate changes. And the repair costs were higher than anyone expected. And now the lender is being incredibly aggressive and—" "How much?" I asked. She stopped. Then, very quietly, "We need to bridge about 84,000. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the precision of the number made it obscene. $84,000. Said the way people ask to borrow a casserole dish. You cannot be serious. My father's voice appeared suddenly in the background. Then closer. Then on the line itself. This isn't the time for attitude. There it was. A financial fire. And somehow I was still expected to arrive, smiling. What exactly are you asking me? I said. He exhaled hard. Vanessa is behind. The market tanked. The refinance fell through. If we don't come up with money fast, she could lose the house. The house they bought with my inheritance. The house they told me I would thank them for. I swiveled my chair slowly, looking out through the half-open blinds into the parking lot below. 2 nurses were walking toward their cars in bright sneakers, laughing about something. Ordinary life moving outside while my family tried to reopen an old wound and climb back inside it. And why? I asked. Would you call me? Silence. Then my mother. Softly. Because you've always been responsible. That line hit me harder than any insult could have. Not because it was new. Because it was the polished version of the same old theft. You are responsible. Therefore, you must rescue the people who harmed you from the consequences of what they did. I said, No. My father's voice hardened immediately. You don't even know the full situation. I know enough. You could save your sister. She didn't save me when you stole from me to buy that house. My mother gasped like I had shouted something vulgar in church. Eleanor, please, she whispered. Don't say it like that. How should I say it? I asked. Should I call it interfamily allocation, shared equity, a family decision? My father went quiet in the way he did when anger became calculation. Then he said, very evenly, you need to come over tonight. We're discussing this as a family. That phrase again. As a family. Meaning, in a room where everyone already agrees I am wrong. I told him I was busy. He said this couldn't wait. I said it had already waited 2 years. Then I hung up. I sat there afterward with my hand still around the phone. And for a few strange seconds I felt almost weightless. The kind of lightness that comes after you do something you used to think would kill you. And then it doesn't. They called 6 more times before dinner. I answered none of them. That evening I heated leftover soup, changed into sweatpants, and reviewed one of my client's debt reduction worksheets. Halfway through, the buzzer to my apartment went off. I froze. Then it rang again. I walked to the intercom and looked at the small screen. Vanessa. Of course, She looked perfect even in panic. Hair blown out, camel coat, gold hoops, mouth tense. In a way she probably thought read as wounded dignity. I nearly didn't buzz her up. Then I did. Because a part of me already understood, this had moved beyond money. This was evidence now. Pattern becoming visible under pressure. I wanted to see what desperation would peel away. When she came in, she didn't sit until I offered. She looked around my apartment first, taking in the simplicity she used to mock. The neat shelves, the plain sofa, the lamp I had bought secondhand and repainted myself. Kute, she said. I smiled faintly. Still renting? I replied. Her eyes narrowed. Good. Let her hear it. She sat finally, crossing one leg over the other. I didn't come to fight. No. I said, you came to collect? She made a small disbelieving sound and leaned forward. Do you know what's actually happening? Probably not the version you tell other people. Her jaw tightened. This is not all my fault. I said nothing. That was the thing she hated most by then. Not my anger. My refusal to provide the emotional furniture she needed to decorate herself as the center of every scene. She tried again. The market shifted. The repairs snowballed. Dad pushed me to refinance at the wrong time. My realtor overpromised. Liam leaving didn't help. It's been one thing after another. Did you come here for sympathy? I asked. Or money? Her face went still. Then she said, both would be nice for once. I laughed softly and looked at her. You used my inheritance to buy your house. That's not what happened. It is exactly what happened. No. She snapped. Mom and Dad made a decision because they believed in my future. There it was. Vanessa in one sentence. Not denial. Translation. Theft became belief, if it benefited her. I stood up and carried my bowl to the sink before I spoke again. And now? She followed me with her eyes. Now she looked less polished. Les certains. Now, she said quietly, I need help. I turned back toward her. And for a moment, I saw something almost honest in her expression. Not remorse, not humility, but fear. Real fear. The kind that strips a person down to survival instinct. It should have softened me. Instead, it made me think of Grandma's letter. She will be pressured. I dried my hands on a towel. What happened to the money Mom and Dad kept pouring into the house? She looked away. I waited. Finally, she said, there were carrying costs. Such es? She shrugged. Maintenance? Taxes? Repairs. What repairs? Why are you interrogating me? Because you are asking me to rescue a financial disaster built on my stolen future. Her expression changed at the word stolen. Like she still couldn't believe I was willing to use language that accurate. She stood up. You always do this, she said. You make everything ugly. No, I said. I describe it. You just don't like how it sounds. Her nostrils flared. You have no idea what it's like to have this much pressure on you. That almost made me smile. No idea. I thought of college bills, bus passes, working Saturdays, tiny apartments, panic over rent, my inheritance disappearing into a family narrative that called me selfish for noticing. No idea. I walked to the small desk by my bookshelf, opened a drawer, and took out a folder. I kept copies of everything there. Statements, probate correspondence, transfer timelines, the attorney's summary memo. Not because I obsessed over the past, though there were months when I did, but because I had learned that reality survives best on paper. I handed her one page. She scanned it, frowned, and tossed it onto the desk. What is this? The amount connected to what Grandma left me. The amount that went into your house. The date? The documentation trail. She gave me a look halfway between disgust and disbelief. You really kept receipts? Yes, I said. Someone had to. That landed. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes darted once around the room. Maybe looking for the old me, the apologetic one, the one who could be morally blackmailed into participating in her own erasure. That woman was gone. Vanessa tried one last angle. If I lose the house, Mom and Dad lose everything too. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not we were wrong. Just another version of the same pressure structure. Widened now to include everyone. I said, that sounds like a consequence. She stared at me for a long second. Then she said something so pure, so revealing, that it settled the last unresolved corner of my heart. You always wanted this. I blinked. What? She laughed once, bitterly. You always wanted us to fail, so you could feel superior. And there it was. The fantasy people build when they cannot admit what they took from you. They rewrite your pain as ambition, your boundaries as cruelty, your survival as revenge. I stepped closer and kept my voice calm. No, Vanessa, I wanted you all to stop using me as backup funding for the life you said I didn't deserve. For once, she had nothing ready. She picked up her purse, straightened her coat, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and said, without turning around, Mom was right. You don't need much to be content. Maybe that's why you're fine living like this. I looked around my apartment, my paid bills, my peace, my stocked pantry, my accounts no one else could touch. And I realized the insult no longer worked because the values under it had changed. I'd rather live like this, I said, than lose a house I bought with someone else's future. She left without another word. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my office. That was new too. She had never entered my professional life before, which told me how bad things really were. She was wearing lipstick too bright for the hour and carrying a handbag I knew she could not currently afford. That was always her style in crisis. Dress for the image you are trying to preserve, not the reality you are living. The receptionist buzzed my desk and said, "There's a woman here who says she's your mother. She seems upset." Of course she did. I told them to send her to the break room. When I walked in, she stood up immediately and took both my hands before I could stop her. Her palms were cold. "Sweetheart," she said, eyes shining, "we need to fix this." I removed my hands gently. "What exactly are we fixing?" She sat back down. The story spilled out in pieces. My parents had taken a home equity line on their own house to support Vanessa during the first year, then a retirement account withdrawal, then credit cards, then bridge financing to cover missed mortgage obligations when the refinance failed. They had convinced themselves the market would recover before the bottom truly mattered. It hadn't. Now, the debt was compounding. The lender was escalating. And the possibility of foreclosure was no longer abstract. I listened without interrupting. At one point, she started crying hard enough that anyone passing the break room door would have assumed I had done something terrible. I folded my arms and waited. Finally, she whispered, "You have savings, don't you?" There it was. No apology before the ask, just collapse straight into extraction. "Yes," I said. She inhaled shakily. "Then help us." Us. A magic word in families like mine. One syllable meant to erase every ledger, every imbalance, every history. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Did you ever plan to repay what was taken from me?" Her face changed. Not grief. Annoyance first, then moral outrage. "Oh my God. Eleanor, we are not talking about the past. We are only talking about the past." I said, "That's why you're here." She pressed both hands flat against the table. "You cannot hold one family mistake over our heads forever." I nearly laughed. One mistake. A whole architecture of theft reduced to one mistake, because naming the true scale would make her sit in shame she had spent years outsourcing. I said, "You used money Grandma left for me? You let me find out from social media. You told me I'd thank you. And now you are here asking for more." She shook her head like I was impossible. "Do you hear yourself? Listen to how cold you sound." "No." I said, "You're hearing what I sound like without compliance." That stunned her silent for half a second. Then she tried a different route. "If your grandmother could see this." I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. "Don't." The word came out low and sharp enough that even she froze. "Do not use Grandma to manipulate me." I said, "She saw this before I did. That is why she wrote what she wrote." My mother's face hardened. There it was again. That mask coming off under pressure. "Fine," she said. "Then let's stop pretending this is about principles. You're angry. You want us to suffer." I leaned down, palms on the table, and met her eyes. "No, I want you to stop handing me your bill and calling it love." She stood too, breathing hard now. People always talk about family confrontation as if it arrives with shouting. Sometimes it arrives much quieter. Two women in a fluorescent break room, a humming vending machine, a clock ticking somewhere beyond the wall, decades of hierarchy shifting by 1 inch, and suddenly the entire building groans. My mother's voice dropped. "Your father is considering selling our house." I stared at her. For the first time, something like reality crossed her face. Not strategy, not guilt performance. Fear. Old age fear. Stability fear. The terror of people who spent too long assuming someone else would absorb the impact. And despite everything, a small part of me hurt for her. That was the hardest part of being the child they trained to care more than they did. Empathy remains long after trust dies. I sat down again. Slowly. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped with relief, as if the softening in my tone meant the wall had opened. "We need enough to catch up the arrears and restructure. Maybe if you co-sign something." I laughed out loud. Actually laughed. She stopped talking. "Absolutely not." "Eleanor." "No." What if we put something in writing this time? That line was so insulting it almost impressed me. This time, as if the problem had been paperwork rather than character. I shook my head. Then I said the sentence I had been moving toward for 2 years. I am not funding the consequences of what you did to me. She stared. I continued before she could break in. If you want my help, here is the only kind I will offer. I will pay for 1 consultation with a foreclosure attorney. I will pay for 1 session with a licensed financial counselor who is not emotionally involved. I will not give cash. I will not co-sign. I will not bail out the house. And I will not discuss this again without written acknowledgement of what was taken from me. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. That's cruel. No. I said, that's structured. She snatched her purse and stood. You have changed? Yes. I said, that was the goal. She left without looking back. That night my father called. I almost didn't answer. But there was something in me by then that wanted the full map, every final confession, every role spoken plainly. His voice was tired, older than I remembered. You embarrassed your mother? I let out a breath through my nose. No. Dad, reality embarrassed her. He was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he said, I did what I thought was best. There was no anger in it, just the worn-out certainty of a man who had mistaken authority for wisdom for so long he no longer knew the difference. For who? I asked. He did not answer. So I did. For Vanessa. Always for Vanessa. That's not fair. I looked up at the ceiling of my apartment, at the faint crack in the paint over the dining area. You spent my inheritance on her? We were trying to secure her future. And mine? He exhaled hard. You were always going to be okay. There it was. The sentence under every decision they had ever made. You were always going to be okay. Children like me hear that and are supposed to feel proud. But what it really means is this. We saw your strength and treated it like unpaid labor. I said, very quietly, do you have any idea what it cost me to become okay? He didn't answer. Maybe because he didn't know. Maybe because he had never wondered. I told him about the second jobs, the skipped vacations, the cramped apartments, the therapy, the years of watching my own desires arrive already burdened by guilt. I told him what it felt like to discover that the one person who tried to protect me was right, that I would be pressured, that the money would become a test of whether I believed I deserved a future more than my family deserved access to it. He listened. When I finished, the line was so quiet I thought he might have hung up. Then he said, I didn't know you felt like that. And for some reason that hurt more than denial. Because it meant all those years, all that pain. And he had never looked closely enough to know. I closed my eyes. That's the problem. A week later, I received an email from my mother. Subject line, proposal. Attached was a single page outlining an acknowledgement that funds originally intended for me had been used in support of Vanessa's home purchase. It was carefully worded, vague in places, protective in others. There was no apology, no repayment plan, just enough language to create the appearance of admission without real accountability. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to the attorney I had consulted 2 years earlier. He called me the next day. This is movement, he said. Not enough, but movement. He explained the leverage points calmly. With proper documentation, there might be room for a negotiated settlement. Not full restoration, not perfect justice, but a recoverable portion tied to acknowledgement, estate misapplication arguments, and pressure against exposure. "What do you want?" he asked again. This time I knew. "I want the truth documented," I said, "and I want whatever money can be recovered without chaining myself to them." He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "That's a very sane answer." It took 3 months. 3 months of letters. 3 months of revised language. 3 months of my mother accusing me of turning family into litigation and my father asking whether I really needed to drag this out. 3 months of Vanessa, alternating between rage and silence. At one point she sent me a message that said, "If you do this, you're destroying what's left of this family." I typed back, "You did that when you agreed to live in my future." Then I blocked her. In the end, the settlement was smaller than the original theft and larger than they ever expected me to get. $72,000. Paid partly from the sale of my parents' second vehicle, partly from liquidated investments my father had sworn he would never touch, and partly from the forced sale of some of Vanessa's upgrades, including furniture and designer fixtures she had once shown off online like trophies. It was not full justice, but it was real. Documented. Transferred. Mine. The day the money hit my account, I did not cry. I made tea. I sat by my window. I read Grandma's letter again, and I let myself feel something I had postponed for years. Not triumph. Relief. Because revenge, at least the useful kind, is rarely about watching someone burn. It is about getting your life back from the fire. The house was sold 6 months later. Atalos. Not catastrophic, but ugly enough that no one could keep pretending it had all been a smart temporary setback. Vanessa moved into a smaller rental on the other side of town. My parents downsized the following spring. The big family home where every holiday had doubled as a courtroom for my character went on the market with fresh paint and staged flowers on the porch. I drove past it once while the sign was up. Just once. Not to gloat. To witness. Some endings need a physical address before your body believes them. My mother called after the move and said the new place was cozier. My father said less. He had become quieter through all of it. As if consequence had finally done what argument never could. Vanessa did not call at all. Not for nearly a year. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. "I know you probably won't answer, but I wanted to say I hated you for a long time because it was easier than admitting I built my whole life on being rescued." I read it 3 times. Then once more. There was more. I don't know if I'm apologizing right. And maybe I'm not. But you were right about the house. About all of it. Mom and Dad made me think support was love and that I deserved more than you because I needed more. I believed them. I'm trying not to anymore. I sat very still on my sofa. Phone in hand. Heart doing that old painful thing it does, when the person who hurt you finally touches the edge of truth. I did not answer immediately. I waited until evening. Then I sent one line. "I hope you learn how to live without needing someone else to pay for it." That was all. Not because I was cruel, because that was the most honest blessing I had. A month later, my father asked if I would have dinner with him. Just him. We met at a quiet Italian place halfway between our neighborhoods. He looked older, smaller somehow, not physically, structurally, as if life had finally informed him that volume was not the same thing as authority. He ordered decaf. He asked about my work. He told me the new condo had thin walls and terrible parking. For 20 minutes we spoke like two people circling the edges of a lake neither of us wanted to fall into. Then he set down his glass and said, "I was harder on you because I trusted you more." I looked at him across the candlelight. That was not trust. He nodded once. I know that now. Maybe he did. Maybe partly. Maybe as much as he was capable of at that age. With that much pride scar tissue? He looked down at his hands. I kept thinking Vanessa just needed one more chance to stabilize. One more push. One more save. And you never asked for anything. I let the silence hold for a moment. That's because asking was expensive in our house. His face tightened. Good. Let it. He apologized then. Not elegantly. Not in the complete language therapy teaches or books celebrate. But plainly. For choosing wrong. For dismissing me. For acting like my competence meant I needed less care. I listened. And when he was done, I told him something true. I don't need you to rewrite the past. I said, but I do need the future not to look like it. He nodded. And that, I realized, was enough for that evening. Not forgiveness. A boundary with oxygen in it. My mother took longer. She wanted reconciliation to look decorative. Phone calls. Holidays. Photos. She wanted the appearance of healing before she had fully earned the intimacy of it. I no longer confused those things. So I made rules. I would meet for lunch. Not open-ended weekends. I would not discuss my finances. I would leave any conversation that used guilt as a shortcut. I would not attend holidays where I was expected to perform harmony at the expense of reality. The first time I enforced one of those rules, my mother cried. The second time, she got angry. By the fourth, she adapted. People call that harsh. I call it training. Families do not magically become safe because time passes. They become safer because someone finally changes the cost of access. 3 years after the house sold, I bought my own place. Not a dramatic dream house. Not a porch made for photos kind of property. A quiet 2-bedroom townhouse with plain brick, decent light, and enough room for a home office and a kitchen table that did not double as my desk. I put 20% down. I chose a fixed-rate mortgage. I read every line before signing. The morning I got the keys, I stood alone in the empty living room and let the silence settle around me. No one had gifted this to me. No one had maneuvered me into debt for appearances. No one had taken from one sister to build it for another. It was not flashy. It was mine. I brought Grandma's letter with me that day. I set it on the windowsill while sunlight moved slowly across the floorboards. And I said out loud, to no one and to her, I chose myself. That was the real ending. Not when the market crashed. Not when my family panicked. Not even when some of the money came back. The real ending was the day I stopped treating survival as proof that I could tolerate more. People love stories where karma arrives like lightning. Sudden. Visible. Clean. But most of the time, karma looks like math. Like interest accumulating while illusions collapse. Like a child who was trained to accept crumbs learning how to count. Like a woman everyone called cold, becoming the only honest person in the room. My parents spent my inheritance on a house for my sister. They told themselves it was strategy. They told me it was family. They told the world it was support. But when the market crashed, all the language fell away. And underneath it was the truth that had been there from the beginning. They thought my future was available. They were wrong. If this story has a lesson, it is not that money ruins families. Money reveals the values already living inside them. Who gets protected? Who gets used? Who gets called selfish for wanting what was already theirs? And what happens when the quiet child finally learns that peace is not the same thing as surrender? I still speak to my family. Carefully. In measured doses. My father and I have something almost respectful now. My mother tries harder than she used to. Though I can still hear old habits under certain sentences, Vanessa and I are civil on birthdays and brief at funerals. Which, for us, may be the closest thing to wisdom. There was no dramatic reunion. No perfect healing. No final group embrace in a sunlit kitchen. Just something truer. Consequences. Documentation. Distance. And a life I built anyway. Sometimes people ask whether I regret not helping save the house. I always answer the same way. There was never a house to save. Not really. Just a monument built from entitlement, denial, and money that was never theirs to spend. I do not regret refusing to hold it up. I regret only that it took me so long to understand that being the responsible one did not make me morally obligated to be the sacrifice. Grandma knew before I did. That still humbles me. But I know now. And once you know, you can choose differently. That is the kind of inheritance no one can steal.